Hello. We have been discussing the Eleatic schools and we have had talked about Parmenides and Zeno. We would be also taking up yet the other important Eleatic thinker, Melissus of Samos, in this lecture. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College. Melissus of Samos, Melissus, Melissus. Now, Melissus was a Greek philosopher and a naval commander from the island of Samos. He was active around mid-5th century BCE and he was younger than Parmenides, and he was not likely a direct disciple per se, but a strong proponent of the Eleatic monism. He is often considered the last representative of the Eleatic school. Now, first thing where Melissus or why Melissus is important is because for the significant contributions that Melissus did to Eleatic school. And what were those contributions? The first was systematization of Eleatic doctrine. Melissus gave the Eleatic philosophy a more formal, logically argued structure. Unlike Parmenides' poetic and mythic form, Melissus wrote in clear Ionian prose with an aim to make the Eleatic worldview rationally self-evident. What was implicit in Parmenides, Melissus makes it explicit. Now, if we see the PPT here, the extension of monism, the concept of the one is, Parmenides found it finite and spherical. For Melissus, the concept of one is infinite and formless. Now, the concept of being for Parmenides is eternal, timeless. For Melissus, it is everlasting. It's temporal duration. The concept of perception for Parmenides was dismissed. The concept of perception for Melissus was that it may allow perception of being. On non-being, Parmenides stated that it is impossible, and Melissus says that on non-being it is also impossible but argued differently. So we see that Melissus' treatise, which is often titled On Nature or On What Is, survives in fragmentary form. His work is preserved mainly through Simplicius and in Diels-Kran's collection or DK 30. Now, main features of Melissus' philosophy. For Melissus, being is eternal. Melissus argues that if being came into existence, it must have come from non-being, which is impossible. Therefore, it always was and always will be. Being is unlimited. Unlike Parmenides, who claimed the one is bounded like a sphere, Melissus says it must be spatially infinite. If it had a limit, it would have a boundary, and therefore something beyond, which is impossible, has to be the feature of being. Being for Melissus is changeless and motionless. All change, generation and movement require division or non-being, which Melissus denies. Change would imply that being was once other than it is, contradicting its completeness and unity. Being is one and homogeneous. There cannot be a multiplicity of beings, since this would require division and plurality, introducing non-being. Thus, being is one, full and identical with itself everywhere. Being is incorporeal. Some interpretations suggest Melissus approached the idea that being is not material in the ordinary sense, a proto-idealism. His idea of formless infinity points beyond physical categories. Perception and knowledge. Melissus was less hostile to sense perception than Parmenides. While he acknowledged its deceptive nature, he tried to reason from perception to rational principles, unlike Parmenides, who deemed the senses entirely unreliable. Perception and knowledge. Melissus was less hostile to sense perception than Parmenides. While he acknowledged its deceptive nature, he tried to reason from perception to rational principles, unlike Parmenides, who deemed the senses entirely unreliable. Now, if we look at the textual source, we see that the source DK 30, the content has been fragment collection of Melissus writings is important. The other source of Melissus is Simplicius, his commentary on Aristotle's physics, and the content here preserves and explains Melissus' arguments. The source of Plutarch and Diogenes Laertius content is biographical and doxographical references. Source of Aristotle's Metaphysics and Physics, the content here discusses Melissus critically, especially his view of the infinite. So we see that Melissus' rigorous logical method foreshadows Stoic logic and Eleatic rationalism. He set the stage for later debates on infinity, including with Anaxagoras, Empedocles, and the atomists. His infinite, changeless being deeply influenced discussions of ontological unity and even resonated in Neoplatonic metaphysics. Now, if we are to talk about the ontological claim, we see that Melissus' position was clear. He said that reality is one, eternal, infinite, changeless. The philosophical style of Melissus has been rational, argumentative prose, not poetry. Innovation for Melissus has been infinity of being, temporal eternity, logical structure. Contribution for Melissus has been strengthened and clarified. Eleatic monism, it gave it more analytical rigor. Now, if one further talks about the three philosophers side by side, we see that there are some interesting continuity in them as much as there is some discontinuity too. Now, quickly, if we talk about the lifespan approximately of the role in Eleatic school of Parmenides, we see that it is around 515–450 BCE. For Zeno, it was 490–430 BCE. Melissus of Samos was around 475 BCE. Parmenides of Elea, though largely hailed as the founder, but it was Xenophon who was the founder, and he was yet another important thinker. And Zeno of Elea was a defender, and Melissus of Samos was the systematizer and extender. Now, relation to Parmenides, Parmenides, like Xenophon, was the originator who contributed originally. Zeno of Elea was a disciple and apologist. Melissus of Samos was a follower. The main work of Parmenides was on nature. For Zeno of Elea, it was a lost treatise which is only known through Plato Simplicius, and Melissus of Samos his work was on what is, which is in prose fragmentary. Now, the form of writing of Parmenides was epic poetic hexameter. For Zeno of Elea, it was prose, dialectical paradoxes, and Melissus of Samos was the Ionian prose, logical treatise. The core doctrine of Parmenides of Elea has been that reality is one, unchanging, eternal, undivided. Zeno of Elea is that motion and plurality are logically impossible, and Melissus of Samos is that being is infinite, eternal, changeless, and more analytically argued. Now, on the feature of on being, Parmenides stated that being is timeless, finite, spherical. Zeno, on the other hand, defends Parmenidean being but negating motion multiplicity. Melissus of Samos states that on being it is infinite, extended and everlasting. The view on motion for Parmenides of Elea is that he completely denied motion is illusion. Zeno of Elea refuted motion via paradoxes, and Melissus of Samos denied motion through formal argument. Now, on the view of change or becoming, Parmenides stated that it is illusion, being cannot become what it is not. Zeno says that becoming shows that change leads to contradiction, and Melissus of Samos denied change because it implies non-being. Now, on perception, Parmenides of Elea distrusts the senses, champions through logos. Zeno of Elea, on the other hand, critiques sense-based belief in motion, and Melissus of Samos is more tolerant of perception but subordinates it to reason. On time, Parmenides of Elea states that it is timeless reality. Zeno of Elea states that time is implicit in paradoxes but not developed. Melissus of Samos states that time is endless duration, reality always was and always will be. The methodology of Parmenides has been deductive metaphysics, Zeno, dialectical reductio ad absurdum, Melissus of Samos, logical, systematic argumentation. The legacy of Parmenides we see in the founder of Western metaphysics, Zeno, founder of dialectic. Melissus introduced infinity and temporal eternity into Eleaticism. Influence on Parmenides can be seen on Plato, Neoplatonists, Heidegger. Zeno's influence can be seen on Aristotle's logic, Zeno's paradoxes in modern physics, and Melissus of Samos' influence can be seen on atomists, Stoic logic and early metaphysics. So, while Parmenides focused on what is through poetic revelation and emphasized being as a perfect eternal now, Zeno aimed to defend Parmenides by discrediting the alternative, plurality and motion through paradoxes, and Melissus rationalized and expanded the Eleatic framework by adding the concept of infinity and everlasting duration. So we see that the Eleatic school was a pre-Socratic philosophical movement in Elea, and which was a Greek colony in southern Italy. It arose in the 5th century BC and profoundly shaped Western metaphysics and logic through its radical claim, which is reality is one, unchanging and indivisible. The school's foundational theme was a rejection of change, motion and plurality as illusions of the senses. Now, going ahead, we must remember that Melissus of Samos in the mid-5th century BCE, his status has been about the logical systematizer and radicalizer of Eleatic monism. Melissus of Samos extended Parmenides' arguments into formal logic, writing in clear prose. He differed from Parmenides by claiming that being is infinite, not spatially finite like a sphere, and is everlasting in time, not timeless. He denied change, motion and multiplicity like Parmenides, but with a more logical and analytical style. He held move Eleatic ideas towards abstract metaphysics, more open to perception, though still secondary to reason. So basically we see that the principle of monism has been the Eleatic view, where reality is one, there is no true plurality. Immutability, here reality is unchanging, change is illusion. Eternity, being has no beginning or end. Incorporeality, the one is not bodily, not subject to change. Non-being, it cannot be thought of or spoken of. It does not exist. Epistemology, true knowledge comes from reason, not the senses. Thus, the Eleatics introduced metaphysics as the study of being itself. It critically opposed Heraclitus and other pluralists like Empedocles and Anaxagoras, atomists. It influenced Plato, especially Parmenides and Sophists, and Aristotle, Neoplatonists, and modern logic and mathematics. The Eleatics shifted the course of philosophy from cosmology to ontology, the question of what truly is. Their emphasis on being over becoming and reason over perception opened the door to abstract rationalism in Western thought. Melissus of Samos, thus, to make a summary, we understand that he had hailed from Samos, an Ionian island in the Eastern Aegean. He was not from Ilia like Parmenides and Zeno, but is considered an Eleatic philosopher due to the similarity of doctrines. He was also, as stated earlier, a military commander, reportedly defeating the Athenian navy under Pericles. His work is largely on nature or on what is, which is written in Ionian prose, unlike Parmenides' poetic verse. And it definitely survives in fragmentary form, preserved mainly by Simplicius and referred by Aristotle, and it is collected in DK fragments at DK 30. Melissus builds upon and radicalizes the metaphysics of Parmenides. He transforms Parmenides' poetic monism into a rigorous logical argument, extending it in both spatial and temporal dimensions. And the claim, what exists has always existed and will always exist, Melissus differs from Parmenides by suggesting that being exists in time, but without beginning or end. He uses a logical argument. If being had come into being, it would have to come from not being, which is impossible. Melissus further said that unlike in the innovation sector, unlike Parmenides' bounded spherical one, Melissus argues that being has no limits. If it were limited, it would have an edge, and beyond the edge, there would be nothing. That is, non-being which cannot exist. Thus, being must be infinite in extent. Being is changeless and indivisible. Change, movement or division implies becoming or difference, which means non-being, and this cannot be. Therefore, being is unchanging, indivisible, the same everywhere. Being does not have to be void or emptiness. It is full, since there is no empty space. Motion is impossible. This leads towards a view of being that is formless and immaterial, an early philosophical move towards idealism. And unlike Parmenides' mythic vision of a goddess revealing truth, Melissus relies on systematic logic. He presents deductive arguments for his claims using language that anticipates later Stoic and Aristotelian logic. So we see that the comparison of these thinkers in the feature of form, for Parmenides it was poetic, for Melissus it is a rational prose. Being for Parmenides is finite, spherical, for Melissus it is infinite, formless. Time for Parmenides is timeless, it is outside time. For Melissus it is everlasting, infinite time. Space for Parmenides is bounded, for Melissus it is unlimited. Feature of motion for Parmenides is impossible, motion for Melissus is also impossible, and the methodology for Parmenides has been revelatory metaphysics. Melissus has had been rational argumentation. Now, if we are to talk about the sources of Melissus, we have just about mentioned sources like DK, Simplicius, Aristotle, offers about the standard fragments of Melissus' writings, and they preserve major arguments and fragments, and they also critiques Melissus, especially his views on infinity. Further, the sources from Melissus can also be traced in Diogenes Laertius, Lives of the Philosophers, Professor Jonathan Burns, The Pre-Socratic Philosophers, Patricia Card's The Legacy of Parmenides. And what does it offers? These sources offers bibliographical summary, detailed philosophical analysis, modern interpretation of Eleatic school, and the sources largely have been Diogenes Laertius, Jonathan Burns, Patricia Card. So we see that the very basic importance of Melissus has been that he bridges myth and logic. Melissus moves Eleaticism from poetic intuition to systematic reasoning. Yes, there have been occasions when Melissus of Samos did go beyond Parmenides, particularly in two important features, where he says that being cannot be bounded, it is beyond boundaries. And secondly, unlike Parmenides, who had said that being is in a spherical shape, he says it is shapeless. And also the second difference with Parmenides has been that Melissus says that about time, it is everlasting. And unlike Parmenides, who says that just time doesn't exist. These are the two differences of Melissus from Parmenides, but nevertheless, he is considered an Eleatic school of thought and thinker because for his contribution to Eleaticism. And we know that Melissus introduces the concept of infinite being into Western metaphysics and continued what Xenophon, Parmenides, Zeno had tried to do in their times. The Eleatic school also sets up a logical challenge to pluralist thinkers like Empedocles, Anaxagoras, and the atomists. And we must remember that the atomists had introduced void and motion. Melissus's denial of the void anticipates later cosmology and Spinoza's monadology and other features. So, to conclude, we can say that Melissus of Samos stands as the logical extension of Parmenidean monism. Monism, yes, radical monism, yes, but in this radical monism, Melissus of Samos will always be remembered as a strategizer and a radical thinker who retained the Eleatic originals but also contributed his own views. While Melissus unfortunately is less celebrated than Parmenides or Zeno, he did play a crucial role and he can be happily clubbed as the unsung hero of the Eleatic school, and one should not forget, especially if one is a Greek enthusiast, to remember that Melissus of Samos was the one who is known for refining Eleatic philosophy, for introducing the idea of infinity, for systematizing metaphysical reasoning. Melissus of Samos is a transitional figure paving the way for both the atomists and metaphysical idealism, and for reasons as stated above, we should give the due credit to Melissus of Samos as and when we are doing the Eleatic school. For the very discussion of Eleaticism will be incomplete if Melissus of Samos is not discussed. Thank you so much.